Have you ever gotten finished with a project and needed to get started on something else, but you just couldn't figure out how to? When that happens, it usually just gets labeled as procrastination, or just plain laziness. However, it could actually be something more than just not wanting to do any work, although that is usually the case. It could be attributed to a thing called executive dysfunction, and there's quite a lot to it. So much so that I wanted to make a video about it. I'll be going over what executive dysfunction is, how it's different from laziness, the cause and effects, my experience with it, and what can be done to reduce its symptoms. Let's jump right in. First and foremost, what even is executive dysfunction? Well, let me just tell you now that for the rest of the video I'll be referring to executive dysfunction as ED for short. Wait, ED is for the other dysfunction. Let's just go with XD. That's not much better, actually. EXD? It's kind of a mouthful. Forget it, I'll just use the full name. Anyways, before we explain what executive dysfunction is, we need to explain what it isn't. Specifically, how it's different from laziness and procrastination, the two things it's usually labeled as. Laziness is when you don't want to do a task, you choose not to, and you're perfectly fine not doing it. Whether it be because you know someone else will do the thing, you just don't care if it gets done, or whatever other reason. An example is if you wanted to draw, but just decided not to, and didn't care too much if it didn't get done. Procrastination. Procrastination is when you want to do a task, but push it off to a later time because it seems difficult, boring, or just time-consuming. An example of this would be having to do the dishes, but it being such a daunting task that you put it off until it's almost too late, ending up rushing it all together and leaving you with dirty dishes. Now for the main topic of the video. Executive dysfunction is when you both want to do the task and intend on it at that very moment, as there's nothing stopping you. But the issue is that your brain may be having trouble transitioning between the thought processes for the separate tasks. An example is if you just finished some homework for your English class, and you needed to do math next, but the two ways of handling each of the subjects is so hard to switch between for you that time gets wasted from that. The major difference between the three is guilt. If you don't feel any guilt, then it's laziness. And although procrastination and executive dysfunction have more overlap, procrastination lacks a desire to complete the task. The major way of differentiating the two is that the former is more about having trouble starting the task, while the latter is about the struggle of switching between tasks. Now that I've summarized what it is, what makes up the inner workings of executive dysfunction? Well, to know what the dysfunction is, we need to understand what the actual functions are. Executive functions are a set of cognitive processes that are necessary for the control of a person's behavior, by which I mean choosing between behaviors that instigate the completion of goals. Executive functions include basic processes such as attention control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. Executive functions evolve over a person's life, and can be affected by outside influences. To make it sound less like I'm reading right off of a research paper, executive functions are basically what your brain does to make you get things done. Executive dysfunction, or executive function deficit, is a disruption to the efficiency of those functions, which can refer to both minor cognitive deficits and behavioral symptoms. Executive dysfunction appears to consistently involve disruptions in task-oriented behavior. Impairments in set shifting ability are a notable symptom. Set shifting is, in simpler terms, the ability to dynamically change focus between tasks based on the goals and stimuli. A good example would be moving from washing the dishes to working on homework, or whatever. This can offer quite the explanation for impulsive, hyperactive, disorganized, and aggressive behavior in people with executive dysfunction. It may also lead to major emotional irregularities, which can manifest as chronic depression, anxiety, or frequent overreaction. My experience with executive dysfunction usually occurs when working on big projects, or schoolwork, or rather switching between subjects, or going from non-school related projects to schoolwork. I always end up waiting until a specific time to start working on something to build up my motivation, basically making a whole event out of it, which happens to be a huge waste of time. And in that huge waste of time, I always feel bad for wasting time, even though I try my best to get the stuff done. There are more symptoms than that, but that's just my experience with the symptoms and how I deal with it. Not to say I've been diagnosed or anything, but executive dysfunction might be more common than you think. It has connections to several other disorders and diseases, with a few examples being schizophrenia, ADHD, Tourette's syndrome, bipolar disorder, Parkinson's disease, and some areas of the autism spectrum as well. This is due to all of them involving some sort of neurological trouble, with either grouping tasks, disruptions in thinking, or spared performance in terms of attention and concentration. Or all of them. Now, what causes executive dysfunction in the first place? The major cause is genes. Usually Levi's are the ones to do it. In all seriousness, biological makeup is very much responsible for this phenomenon, with the severity of the dysfunction depending on your brain's development in terms of general learning, memory retrieval, and other neurological characteristics. Ugh. Now that I've said it like a nerd, I'll explain it more simply. The way your brain processes information involving tasks and goals is stored in the brain, obviously. Executive functions are what allow us to store these tasks, goals, and processes in our heads in an organized manner, like a silverware drawer. Executive dysfunctions turn your brain into a junk drawer, to put it simply. On top of just plain genetics, some research suggests that it can also come from things that happen in the developmental stages of a person. What research? I'll never tell. Now, are there any ways to lessen the effects of executive dysfunction? The way it's treated is entirely dependent on the person, so there are a few different methods. This thing called cognitive behavioral therapy is the most suggested, but it hasn't shown much effectiveness. However, group rehabilitation seems to work somewhat better. Psychosocial treatment has shown much more success, showing improvements in the problem areas executive dysfunction brings. I won't really explain psychosocial treatment because it has enough depth to be its own video topic, but basically it's just a variety of different services to help people with mental illnesses understand and try to remedy them to the best of their ability. To summarize, executive dysfunction is a mental disorder that causes a person to have trouble performing normal tasks in an organized and consistent manner. This isn't really a horrible, evil thing, but it can definitely cause trouble if you have a lot of work on your plate on a tight schedule. If you think any of the stuff I spouted in this video accurately describes the way you work, try talking to a parent or a friend about it, and see if anything can be done to try and remedy some of the more extreme symptoms. Or don't. I'm nowhere near a doctor. I just saw a topic of discussion that I thought would make an interesting video. Sorry if this video wasn't all that funny. I just wanted to talk about the thing. Anyways, my name is Goose. I thank you very much for watching. Go away.